Dr. Thomas. How are you?
Hello.
Good to see you. I know this conversation has been long overdue. It's been trending now for a couple of days. So I started having this conversation with Lewis probably a week ago. In addition to my listeners, so the conversation I'm referring to is lots of discussion around like recent layoffs and shifts and trying to help people adjust. So I was on a panel last Friday with a bunch of black women, a lot of from different segments of the industry in terms of educators, psychologists, teachers. It just ran the gamut. There were many women who are part of that conversation. Most of them who are in the room were PhD holders, and although PhD holders, again, when you think about just the trajectory of education, if some of you have a PhD, that means you have an advanced degree, and that's usually a terminal degree that people pretty much go into the field thinking, okay, I'm going to retire with this level of education. So nonetheless, although these women are highly educated, they were finding themselves in a situation where they are now looking for a job because they were recently laid off, or there had been some sort of change in their current job title, or their job was completely just written off. So my purpose of being in that on that panel and leading the discussion was to help the women start to think about ways to reframe their focus, to use their education or to use their doctoral research to create another pathway to living, like more sustainable in terms of having more control over their income and how much money is coming in. That led to another conversation, which we started talking about like how do black men play into this conversation? Are they experiencing the pivot at the same rate? Are they experiencing the pivot and for us having to change careers? As much as black women are they emotionally responding the same way? Why not? Or how does this conversation play out when we think about the family structure, or when we think about how men and women relate to each other? I did not have those answers because I am, of course, not a black man. So anytime that people ask about a male perspective, particularly a black male perspective, I always defer. And Lewis will always be my number one person to go to because he's the closest person, in my immediate circle who's also, educated, who also just knows a lot about various transitions, and who also knows a lot about the social political aspect of the conversation we're having. So here he is today to kind of fill in some of those gaps around like how are black men responding, and is the conversation happening at the ground level in terms of our family systems, in terms of our relationships, and again, like how can we help to connect with each other to move the whole system forward. So Lewis, based on what I've shared, and I know we've had many conversations, how do you think the black man is relating to what we're experiencing right now in terms of a lot of changes and shifts in education and job development, job stability or security? So how do you think that the black man is relating to this current climate that we're in?
So, I think that the way that we contextualize this conversation has to be centered in what I call black social and political realism, right? The fact of the matter is that for the most part, black folk understand what struggle is. We understand how struggle relates to how we live and how we exist in this country in particular. And so I think we always have to start there. We have to start from a historical context as it relates to the fact that we know what struggle is. Okay? And so this experience is not the worst experience that black men and women have ever been through, although it may seem that way to some who have not experienced, maybe younger women. But it is not the worst experience historically that black people have gone through economically, politically, in terms of jobs. It is not the worst that we've ever been in. And so I don't want to frame the conversation as though, because we also don't want to elevate the anxiety higher than it has to be, right? So we don't want to take it beyond where it actually is. And I think one of the roles that you and I can play is helping to bring that temperature down and have people really
Agreed.
face what this reality really is, and that it is not so vastly different
Right.
from what black folk have experienced in the past or even in the modern era, right? And so I like to start there first. Secondly, I would say that having said that, I don't think that the level of anxiety is potentially any higher for black men than it always has been. At least that's not what I find. I think that depending upon the class group that you are situated in, that anxiety probably differs. And so you were on a forum with a bunch of educated black women who were situated in a different professional space than most, probably even most black men. And so their level of anxiety, I think, is different because they are taking into account, how do I meet the needs of the lifestyle that I've created for myself? How do I take care of my children and my family, right? How do I sustain all of these things that I have and that I've accumulated if I don't have employment? And so obviously, naturally, in that class group, that is going to create a different level of anxiety than if you were talking about working class black women, right? Or poor black women. There's probably not the same level of anxiety there. And I would probably argue that most black men probably fall within the frame of working middle class, working class, and poor black men. So I think that the experience as it relates to anxiety is probably a tad bit different. I have not heard, and I don't even think as it relates to the media, I've not found that I've seen a lot of focus on the amount of black women that were let go from the federal government, but there have been no numbers out there as it relates to how that's affected black men. And that may be because there is such a huge disparity right now in terms of educated class, right, between black women and black men. So that may be the reason why. But
which is something I think we also will do it on the back end, but I think that could be something that we can also kind of try to research to figure out like what are the real numbers, because right now we have what I always call Trump numbers, like these these inflated numbers which you don't really know if they're supported or not. But right now we have this massive number of 7,000 what? And so Lewis and I are both like hardcore researchers, so we know that research data can depict whatever you want it to depict. So again, we don't know what those numbers, we don't know how those numbers are classified. So I definitely want to preface that for everybody. Like, we are talking very general terms because we don't have the real numbers around like how people are classified.
And I think more importantly, which is the conversation that you and I were having the other day over the phone, was really how do these behaviors, how do they impact upon how black men and women are relating to each other and with themselves, right? And what role does that play in relation to how it is affecting family units, whatever that may look like for your family, or their relationships with each other, whether they're a heteronormative relationship, whether they're same gender loving. How does all of these factors play a role? And you talked about the fact we talked about in the past when there have been times, way before I got this doctoral degree, there have been periods of struggle, right, for me, right, as a black man. And I was talking about the pressure, especially if you're in the educated class, that I felt to have to not only meet the mark, but exceed the mark as a black man. And that means exceed the mark financially, exceed the mark in terms of being a provider, exceed the mark. And so anything less than that was an attack on my ego, on my positioning in the family. And I would argue that probably most black men feel very similarly.
Right.
No matter what level they're at in those kind of class groups, those classifications.
And then Lewis, so since you're here and you're talking a lot about like anxiety and just like how you felt, Can you give us like a picture, like maybe from your experience, but then maybe also like just men at large that you know, how does anxiety manifest, or how does that pressure manifest? Like, what does that look like?
So I would say, I mean, generally, and probably many black women have experienced this with the black men that they've been in relationships with. The first manifestation is typically shutting down. I mean, they shut down emotionally if they're even connected prior to that. They shut down socially. They shut down in terms of how they're relating to their children and their families. And most importantly, they shut down how they're relating to themselves, which then disables them. And when a black man is disabled in a substantial way, in that kind of way, it's very difficult for them to be able to find their to see what is in front of them, right? And so I recall a time where I was having a rough time as it relates to employment, and I took a job at Planet Fitness or something like that as the evening manager. And here I am, a man with a whole master's degree, and so I'm fighting through all of those things, right? I'm not where I'm supposed to be. I'm not making what I'm supposed to make. This is still not providing my family with what they need, etc., etc. And the list can go on and on and on. And so, so struggling and working through that, having an unwillingness to position yourself in a job that you believe is beneath you. Okay, which is a whole nother set of issues, right? That's a whole nother set of issues, right? That we don't have to deal with right now, but that is another set of issues. For you to think that a specific, because then if it's beneath you, so then everybody who working that job is beneath you. So it's a whole nother situation in terms of how we frame that conversation. So I'm just kind of framing for you how I felt in that moment. And I may have stayed in that job from I don't even know if it was a month, but I just couldn't do it. It just you know, I just I had feelings of degradation. I had feelings of humiliation. I had feelings of embarrassment. I had feelings of anxiety. I had feelings of all of those things. And so I, in that moment, chose to situate myself in a different way, in the best way and path for me forward. Excuse me, at that stage, I felt psychologically was for me to let it go. Now, then what effect then does that have on the family, right? Because if I let this job go, and part of the dollars from this job is being utilized to be able to take care of the family, and I'm focused internally on whatever issues I'm dealing with, and I think this is where black women typically have the challenge with black men. How you just gonna up and quit your job? Right? And so that's a different space to face. Now, I will say, I think I said this to Rashid, I do think that this is an issue for the so-called educated class of black men. I do not believe, I actually find that working class, middle class black men, even poor black men, are much more honorable in their approach to ensuring that their families are taken care of.
And when you're talking about the honorable approach, we're defining it as like just more flexible in their approach to exploring different jobs.
Yes,
that may
willing to do anything that they need to do to take care of their families financially. They don't have all of these degrees and all this other stuff kind of held over their head, which also sets a different expectation for their lives. And so for them, it is just about, how am I going to take care of myself? How I'm going to provide for my family? How I'm going to pay these bills? And so they're focused on that. They're not necessarily focused on the job per
Yeah,
se, or
right.
what it is.
Right.
And so when I say honorable, I'm not saying that it's necessarily dishonorable for that other class of black men to face it in the way that they do, but I'm saying there is a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a significant difference that I found in my research, even working with black fathers in my dissertation,
Mm-hmm.
and the differences in terms of the roles they play in their families as fathers
Right.
for their children, the roles they play in their families as husbands or partners or
Right.
boyfriends to whomever they are with,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how that feeds into their desire to want to provide by any means necessary. Okay, and so I think that is different. And would you say that black women, that's one of the challenges?
Right, I would definitely say that's a major challenge. And as you're even speaking, again, like, Lewis and I are co-parents and co-parenting two wonderful, amazing children, one adult that he helped raise. And then we have Lewis, who's 14 now. But even through the time period that Lewis is speaking of, this was a parallel experience because I'm in the experience, but not of the experience. Like, I had no idea, like, even as he's explaining it now, I didn't know the internal feeling or the internal dialogue that was happening. So yes, I'm having my own experience of knowing, okay, like, well, why isn't he just working? Like, I'm working 3 jobs. Why is he just working 1 job? And so I could not understand it. And that, again, because we're having this parallel experience that we were not collaborating on, we were not having a full discussion on, like, how is it impacting you? Because I would also imagine, based on what you said, that if you would have stayed there and that internal dialogue would have continued, then it would have had more psychological damage.
Absolutely.
That would further disrupt the family unit. So, because we weren't having the conversation together at the time, then you're emotionally reacting, I'm emotionally reacting, but again, from 2 different vantage points of 2 different experiences. And so now even thinking, okay, how can we have like brought the conversation more to, closer so we can connect and then collaborate? Because then on the conversation that Lewis and I had a couple of days ago, he mentioned like if the dialogue was there and active between us, we could have talked about a plan. Okay, we'll use my income for whatever duration, we'll use some other thing until he was able to get on his feet or whatever, like and have more space to explore if we were looped into the conversation together, which I think could be helpful for people who are having this conversation right now, currently having these experiences. The part of the answer is to make sure you let somebody know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the word that I was searching to find in my mind, which I forgot to mention, which is the most significant word to you, is that feeling of shame.
Right.
Right. I mean, deep shame. Especially if you're somebody who wants to work.
Right.
Who wants. I'm not talking about men who just ain't interested, right? Because there are some of those out there, and there are some of those who just don't want to do anything, right? But I'm talking about men who want to work, who are searching for a job, who are looking for employment, who really want to be able to provide for themselves and their families. There is a deep sense of shame that one carries. And so I'm not even sure, even in my research with black men, if we even have the space to be able to communicate or articulate what those feelings are because of the deep sense of shame.
Right.
The deep sense of shame that I felt. And I think it's important to note that black men in America are born into shame. And so the shame is what we spend our time dispelling. So our black boy, right, he wasn't born into shame because of who his parents are. But he can very clearly experience that shame as he goes out into the world. And so we have to provide him with the tools that he requires as a young black man to be able to face some of those attacks that will inevitably happen and occur with him. But we know what those attacks look and feel like. And so it is not just about kind of this one time period. It's also about historical and generational trauma that affects how we as black men respond to these types of occurrences. Right.
And so how do you imagine that we can start to even have the language for it? Because I also know for sure, like even with my clients that I work with, started to work as 2025 more black men than I've ever worked with. And I also noticed that there is, there's some sort of like, I don't want to use the word, I want to use underdeveloped. They're a little underdeveloped emotionally around like their vocabulary for how they feel. They often will say, I don't know, and that is a real answer. Like, I don't know. It literally is a blank slate. Like, nobody has helped them construct that language or that narrative for themselves around their own core emotional identity.
Well, let me just first say, for black women that are raising black boys, right? For black women that are raising black boys, some of you are raising black boys alone. Some of you all are raising black boys with a little support from men or from a father or father figure in their life, and some of you have a father figure in your life, in their lives, who may not even be present or is present, because there are some black men who are right in the house who are not present.
Right.
So I think sometimes we get confused, and I was talking to somebody a few weeks ago about this. We get confused that when we say, "Oh, they came from a two-parent household, their mom and dad was in the house." Well, that don't mean that both the parents were there, right? But that doesn't mean that the black dad was actually present in that space.
Right.
He might have been there, but that doesn't mean that he was engaged. That doesn't mean that he understood how to relate to his children. That doesn't mean that he really saw his role as a nurturer in those relationships. And so the first thing I would say to black women who are raising black boys is that beyond you nurturing them, you also need to provide them with space and language to be able to express their emotions and articulate themselves in an ongoing, continuous way. It's one of the things that we've always worked with Lewis around, right? In terms of being able to have him express himself, encouraging him, and quite often, sometimes even now, I just was talking to him the other day, and he was asking me something in the hallway, and I guess he saw how I looked at him. He didn't even say anything, but he saw how he was like, "Never mind." And so I stopped him right there, and I said, "I do not like when you do that." I didn't say it like that, of course. I said it a little bit differently, but I said, I don't like when you do that. I said, "Stop it. Tell me it doesn't matter what my reaction is going to be. Tell me what it is that you want to say. I want to hear what it is you're asking me, or what it is you want to say." Okay. And so those small, occurrences in the lives of our boys are important for them, to give them voice, so that they and give them agency, so that they have the ability to express themselves. And quite often, we will just shut them down, or we will shut down, and it causes them to shut down their emotions, and then they grow up to be a black man, like these emotionally underdeveloped black men that we are faced with today, who don't have language, who do not know how to articulate their feelings, who don't know how to express themselves appropriately and properly. And so all of that stuff builds resentment from black men, with black men, anger, and it comes out in a multitude of different ways. Whether it's abuse of others, whether it's abuse of themselves, whether it's abuse on each other, it comes out in a multitude of different ways. And so we have to make sure that at a foundational level that we are providing our boys with language. For black men who already exist, right? There's a couple of tools that we can give them. The first tool, we can encourage them to become a part of a group of supportive black men who are at different stages of their lives and careers, that they can talk to seek out friendships outside of the normal group of friendships that they exist with, especially if it's not necessarily a positive friend group, to be able to try to identify other black men, either older black men that they can look to for mentorship, or other black men their age that they can look to for advice and build friendships from there. Because that's the first space that most black men are going to go. They're going to go to each other before they're going to go to a therapist, or they're going to go to somebody else, go to a woman. They're going to go to each other first. And so I would encourage them to try. And sometimes it may come, if you know somebody that you think may match up well with your husband or your co-parent or your friend or your brother or your son, you might want to match them up with that person, introduce them to that person, and hopefully a connection will be made. Right? I've been used in that way in a number of different instances. And so I think that you can do it that way. I think the second tool that we can give to black men in order to being able to find a path back to looking back at themselves is recommend therapy, right? It's a huge step. We do have more black men than ever exploring therapeutic services.
Yes.
And we want to continue to destigmatize the ability of black men to be able to go to therapy and how important that is. That we do have a lot of trauma, a lot of challenges, a lot of issues, both generational and current, that we need some help working through.
Right.
I certainly need help working through all of my stuff, right? And then I think,
and you also went to therapy, so
yes, and
well.
I go to therapy.
Right, that part,
Okay.
that part.
I go to therapy. Okay, not just when I go now. And then the third tool that comes to mind for black men, and this is for those that are engaging with them, is to sit back and listen, actively listen to what they're saying before you react. Because typically when you have that reaction, they will shut down on you.
Right.
And it's very hard for them to move past it, unfortunately. And that's an important, because it also places the onus on like black women and others to be able to situate themselves once again in a position where they kind of have to lead and guide, which is a position that a lot of black women today are rejecting, and I absolutely understand that, and I absolutely support that rejection. But if you are in a position, I would say to at least attempt to actively listen before you respond and react to them, because that may allow them to share more. You may get more out of them, and I think that sometimes when we're in emotionally charged situations, there is an impetus to respond emotionally and to have a serious reaction because you're angry, and rightfully so. You're upset if the man ain't working, if he's not contributing, if he's not helping take care of the family, if he's not doing anything else to take care of the children. And then I think lastly, what I would say is provide black men with other outlets to be able to redefine their roles within the family. Beyond this so-called biblical or Quranic pressure of being a provider, right? There are other roles for us to play. There are other spaces that we need to occupy.
Right, which I think we need to clear. Like providership, or just the idea of just being a provider, is not solely linked to money. It is not. We have gotten that wrong, and that's a whole other conversation that we'll get into on a different day. But again, I think the social pressure of that has turned it into this sort of monetary phenomenon within families or relationships, and it's just gotten us so off track.
Well, it's a Western. It's a Western thought process.
Yes.
I mean, the West grounds its entire existence in money. I mean, money is it, and so obviously, if we are living in the West, we have been assimilated into this culture here. It is no longer about what we call Ubuntu. I am because we are, therefore I am. It is now about what can this individual do for me through what they are contributing monetarily to my life.
Right.
And so it is not about a holistic viewpoint of what one can contribute to the family and the role that men play in that. Men are pigeonholed into the role of this is your role. Your role is to be the provider. It is the woman's role to be the nurturer and the provider. Okay, so the woman gets multiple roles.
Right.
Okay, but the man gets one role. And this is a universal thing with some men. It isn't even relative to just black men. The man gets the one role of I am the financial provider, and that is my role. That's my primary role in this family unit. And every other role is secondary to that, and that is deeply problematic. That's deeply problematic.
Right.
I remember when Rashida had Lewis, and she had just gotten a big promotion at her job, and she wanted to go back. She was ready to go back, and So she went back, and then
But I also was home for a while. I was
you were
also
home for a little while. For a little
like
while.
8 months.
I don't think it was 8 months.
It was. It was around 8 months, 8 or 9 months.
I don't think it was 8 months, Reggie.
Yes, because I went back in January.
I don't think it was 8 months. She'll say I don't think it was 8 months.
It was close to it.
I don't think it was 8 months. But she stayed home for a little while, but it wasn't 8 months because she went back relatively quickly.
No,
because you had just gotten that promotion.
I got the promotion, but it also was like on hold.
Right, but I didn't know because that was why we're having a conversation within a conversation.
Right.
So, and that was why then I left that principal's job, and I then came back home. Okay, so maybe it was
about... Lewis around was like 7 or 8 months.
Yeah, maybe it was. So maybe it was about 7 or 8 months, and then I quit my job, and then I came and I stayed home with Lewis that other year. Because I wanted to fill the gap in. I wanted him to see his dad in a different role in his life. And I had a dad who was a nurturer, and so I wanted to ensure that Lewis had that experience. I thought it was important. Now, all black men ain't able to do that, right? I mean, that's just a fact. All men are not able to do that, and that definitely is understandable. But I often will tell some of those in my life, like my sister, right? If she calls me and she complains about one of her sons and their children's mother, my sister will often lean into, well, I just had to call and let this young woman know about X, Y, and Z, and I often will remind her, well, what did you let him know?
Right.
What did you tell him? Did you tell him the same thing? Because he has the same responsibility to those children as that young woman has. And so I want to make sure you're giving that same energy. And so then her position is, well, she know he ain't going to do it. She knows he's inconsistent, and somebody has to be the adult in the room. Which is true, right? However, there is a caveat to that.
Right.
We also have to continually hold black men accountable.
Right.
And that is something. Now, how we hold them accountable is usually where there's a clash. But we do need to hold them accountable.
Right.
And so we cannot say if you have, produced X amount of children, if you've created all of these different nuances in your family, that you too have a responsibility to be a part of how that family unit is constructed and how we contextualize your behavior within that family unit.
Absolutely.
So I think that all of those things are important, but we have to continually hold them accountable too.
And we have to continue the dialogue, even when it's hard, even when somebody's getting upset. I think we have to, create a continuum here because we know what the inherent issues are, some of these systemic things that are very pervasive at this point. Nonetheless, we also have the answer, for our own unique experiences. And so we have to, say what's going on. We have to communicate with our partners, get the support that we need through mentorship or training or whatever that's going to look like for you, but also pushing yourself a little bit further. And that can look a multitude of ways. But I think because we are now like having these conversations more outwardly, now that also has to translate, okay, like how do we make it more tangible for the individual who's having these experiences?
And before we wrap up, I want to ask you a question about what is some language that you can give to black women to have these kinds of conversations with men around financial strain and without blame?
Right. That's a great question. I would, even as you were talking, I was thinking like, wow, back then I wish that I had this information because I would ask like, what do you need? I think I would have started there like, wow, what do you need? Like, what are your thoughts? What are you experiencing? How do you feel? Because I didn't ask you any of those questions. Yeah, and so I think I would have started there, just to open the conversation up, or to create the space for the man to feel safe or to feel like he is being heard, or you're interested in what he has to say, and that it's not turning into blame or further shame or ridicule. So I think I definitely would have started there with just some open, very broad questions to kind of get us into an ongoing dialogue.
And so it's always very interesting, right? Because when these conversations are had, it's like, women know that if you start off with blame or reactionary behavior, that it accomplishes nothing.
It doesn't.
That you typically do not get what you want
Right.
out of that conversation. And so I'm not sure why then do you continue to have that same type of conversation if it's yielding the same results. And I think that we have to shift our paradigmatic approach to some of these issues, just in how we relate to each other as human beings, right? And just like, okay, this is not working. The majority of situations that I've seen like this do not work. They do not yield positive or substantial results. And so we need to take a different approach. We need to try to approach this situation a little differently. Now, you will have some black women that will say, well, I did try to talk to him, and he still shut down. He still was combative. He still was, right? And so you're
but
not...
that's also because the pattern's already been established.
That's right. And also, I want to make sure that you don't allow him to project onto you that then allows you to project in other ways, right? So some of that stuff is not about you, right? And so it's important for black women to know what things are directly related to their relationship with this black man and what things about his behavior is about him and about whatever harm or challenges or issues that he may be struggling to. And I think that you definitely have to be able to compartmentalize that as a black woman, because if not, you will walk around angry, frustrated, hurt, right?
Or feeling like, you know, his behavior is something about you. He doesn't really love you. He doesn't like you. He's not really interested in you. He's using you. It comes with all this other stuff.
And all of that may be true, right? And even if it is true, most of that still ain't about you.
Right.
Okay? So even if he feels all of those things, if all of those feelings are accurate, right? And if the woman is internalized, that even if that stuff is still not totally about you, right? It's not about you. And which is why I also think that black women in particular have to be centered in themselves, right? And so they have to start from a place of centeredness, of what we call radical healing, which is not just normal healing. It's an intense level of healing where you take yourself through a series of exercises, where you put yourselves in spaces that are going to support your spiritual, intellectual, and social growth, where you create the type of environment in your home setting that is of peace, grounded in that, and happiness. And so I also think that it's important for you to set up those parameters and boundaries for your own life, to know what your limits are, so that you can know that you don't put yourself in positions and situations that allow you to take you outside of where it is that you want to be in your life.
And then the second half to that, because again, all these things are just so cyclical. And so when you think about, because now the conversation is almost shifting, it's like a relational aspect, a relationship component, because everything that Lewis just said, if you're grounded and centered in self, the person that you attract is going to be a complement and not a conflict. And so when we start attracting the man who doesn't work and don't have no interest in working, that's also because the two people were not centered in self first to really figure out what their core values or their purpose for being together is. So that's also a part of that dynamic. Because then if you are grounding, you're saying you both are coming into the relationship for the right means and purposes. If the man is not working or the woman is not working, it's framed differently. You do have the space to wait and try to figure it out together and allow them to go through their natural progression of just like, you know, finding out their next step. That space will be created, and you can frame it like, oh, I know this is just a season. This is just a rough patch. We're going to get through this. But when it's not just a rough patch and it's just indicative of the person you chose and how y'all chose each other, you can tell the distinction. There's a clear distinction between those two.
And there was a recent episode on the reality show Ready for Love that comes on the OWN network. And they were in Philly the last season, and there was a brother on there who was interested in a woman, and he was very honest with her about where he was at that time, and he was saying he didn't have a car. He did not have. I think he was staying in a rooming house, and so he was working through someone. He was a good brother. She really liked him. He had all of the elements of what she desired in a man. But him not having a car was really rough for her. It was, and so ultimately they did go to the end of the show, but right after the show, she said she just wasn't able to move past it. Although
Wow.
he had all of the elements that she wanted, and so Tommy, who is the host of the show, said in one of the episodes to her, he was like, "Listen, when my wife had me, I didn't have anything, and she gave me time to get myself together. She knew I was a good man, and that's where she grounded her approach. And look at me now. She stuck with me. She took care of me. She held it down for me." A lot of black women had a visceral reaction to that.
Yeah,
They had a visceral reaction to that.
Right.
They felt that, why can't he be this? Why can't he do that?
He's not.
Well,
because he's not right now.
Because he's not, and he's not right now.
Yeah.
Right? But do you see a light at the end of the tunnel with this man?
Right.
Is he a hard worker? Is he somebody who's seeking work? Is he? I mean, all of these things, man.
Yeah.
Like, you can determine whether or not is a man who just don't want to work, or if it's a man who's really trying hard. I remember when I was going through a rough patch, I was sending out about 50 resumes a day. You knew that I wasn't just like, oh, I don't want to work, I don't want to be right. And so a man that wants to provide. You know a man that wants to work. You will know who those people are. Yeah. And I feel like this was a man who represented himself in that way. Right. And you could clearly see that he was that type of man. But she was unwilling to give him time. And then her hope, and then another part of her positioning was that, well, why are you on this show? You should be somewhere getting yourself together, right? Instead of on this show, which is just crazy. That's just a crazy statement to make, in my opinion, right? As if whether he was on the show or not, that was going to get him together any quicker. I mean, it just sounds ridiculous, right? Maybe the show is a pathway to him getting himself together. I don't know. But whatever the case may be, I mean, the idea that one has to stop every aspect of movement in their lives to address this other aspect of them, it's totally preposterous. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can seek out opportunities that you are interested in, which is being on this reality show, while simultaneously trying to find a job and improve your life and improve your positioning, in your life. And so I say all of that to say that we have to kind of release this cloud of judgment that we often place on each other, and I'm guilty of it too. So it's not like because typically it's a reflexive reaction that many of us have. And so I'm not speaking from a position of power over. I'm speaking of a position of somebody who also has to check themselves when making judgment calls about who people are and where they are in their lives or what is occurring with them. And so we have to be careful about that. We have to be careful about passing judgment on people. We don't know their situations for the most part. We don't know what they may be struggling with internally. And if you don't know any of that, for you to totally dismiss all of that, it's not helpful.
Right.
And so I just think that we just have to be careful with that. And I would just lean into those tools in terms of being able to open up some space for the black men in your lives. And it doesn't matter who that black man is. Like I said, it might be your husband, might be your partner, might be your brother, might be your son, okay? Might be your nephew, might be your godchild, might be your friend, okay? And so none of us are able to work ourselves out of these situations alone. It will take a sense of community building, community wealth, and community centering to assist us in being able to move beyond to the next stage of how we kind of see ourselves as a community moving forward. And there isn't just one answer, right? We are offering some answers from our perspective, but there are obviously other ways of being, other ways to address some of these challenges, and other ways to look at some of these issues potentially that we'll do in the past. And I think that we'd like to thank you today.
Right? Definitely.
This segment that we're going to call Two Docs, One Village, which will fall right under the realm of a lot of the work that Dr. Ra is doing, and we'll continue these kinds of conversations ongoing, maybe even bring another guest to be a part of these conversations with us. But we'd like to thank you all for spending a little bit of time with us and allowing us to share our perspectives about life, love, relationships, and how Black people can be fulfilled, fully, lively, happy, and satisfied, right? Living
Absolutely.
in a satisfied, happy way.
And I also want to just, before we end, because I also want to give Lewis his flowers while he's here. I think that's also very, very important. Just letting people know how you feel about them, because we have a long history together, and so with our experience is one of many experiences. But again, we're using our voices just to continue to help others, live life more satisfied, and also just kind of tune into you, who you are, like how you want your family to develop, and what are you trying to shape for yourself, around like your own life meaning. And so Lewis, definitely, I just appreciate you. I appreciate you being willing to be here. I appreciate him being an awesome co-parent. Awesome. Ooh, Lord, he allows me to live a soft life as a co-parent. So I'm just like, thank you, Jesus. So I get to do all the things as a mom, and just also just have my time to develop and just become into my own. And I would not be able to do that without you, as the man that you are, the co-parent that you are, the partner that you've always been. And I just really, really love and appreciate you.
Yep, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. It's all love between us. We've known each other since the 5th grade, 6th grade. So we've been together a long time, and I think that your hope is always that your children are going to be a reflection of the relationships you have with each other, how you relate to each other, how you treat each other, how you love each other, even in the tough times, right? Because even a lot of that anger that we feel towards each other, a lot of that vitriol, a lot of that comes out of love, the love you all have for each other. And so I would encourage everyone to lean into that lean away from the anger and the vitriol, lean into the love. And if you're able to start there, I feel like you'll come out in the right place. And you may even transform and change some lives, while you're doing it, including the lives of those that may still be sitting in all of that anger and vitriol. So just know that. And I'm looking forward to these ongoing conversations.
Yes, definitely, definitely.
And what this is going to turn out to be for us. So please join us back here, in a week or two, and we'll have another topic and another rich conversation to have addressing some of these issues of the day.
All right. Thank you very much. Continue to create the life you love so that you can live the life you deserve. Bye for now.